This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, back by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, the editor and writer of the blog The Point, and he's a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you for having me on one more time.
Okay, and tonight we have quite a title for our show, Avoiding Rape is White Privilege. And I can attribute this profound sentence and idea to you, right, Daniel? You wrote this to me in an email after I shared the story that Breitbart ran. And Breitbart ran a story on this particular left-wing activist, Karsten Nordell-Hauken. And the title of the story is, After Anal Rape, Left-Wing Activist Felt, quote, Guilt and Responsibility. His migrant attacker was deported. This is a leftist male who was raped by a Somalian Muslim refugee. The Muslim refugee goes to jail for a while for committing that rape, perpetrating that rape, then gets deported, and the victim is on his side feeling guilty and is in despair that the Muslim rapist has been deported. What do you make of this, Daniel?
Well, it's a great tragedy. I mean, if you think about it, this Somali Muslim rapist could have really turned his life around. He could have contributed enormously to society. He could have become a doctor, a scientist, and maybe a prime minister, or, more likely have just gone on raping more men, which is really the most likely outcome. But really, it's very sad because no doubt this person was disappointed. He was very sad. He was probably very upset about the foreign policy because that's really the usual reason given for terrorist attacks. So he was probably just committed this rape because he was angry at the foreign policy. Or again, more likely, he was a rapist from a religion which says that you're supreme and therefore you have the right to do to others as you want.
Now, one is so, stumbled sometimes by dealing with this toxic dysfunctionality and suicidal death wish of the left that, in this story, it takes this very morbid, sexual, perverted kind of spiral towards death here. But it's this reflects and manifests very much the whole narrative of fellow travelers, of leftists, of communists, who are willing to sacrifice others, including themselves, on the altar of utopian ideals, Daniel, correct?
Well, they are very big on guilt, and this is certainly hugely guilty. This is Stockholm Syndrome in action. That's the entire left's obsession with the idea that if a Muslim does something bad, then something worse must have happened to the Muslim, and therefore the really guilty party is not the rapist. The rapist was just probably driven to it. The real guilty party is the privileged party, which is the white guy who was raped because of his privilege, and now he's just acknowledging his privilege by feeling very guilty about it, which again is what the left does very well.
Okay, just a sec. So crystallize this for us here, that avoiding rape is white privilege. In other words, part of this guy's rationalization, aside from all the Stockholm Syndrome and all this self-hatred, he has rationalized that only privileged whites avoid rape, and he is so sympathetic and allied to the working class and to the oppressed, etc., that he is willing to get raped by them, right?
Well, rape apparently is far more commonplace in Somalia. Not being raped is a form of white privilege, just like not having men with machine guns roar their way into your village and shoot everybody up is also a form of white privilege. So you're checking your privilege, you're getting raped, you're getting murdered, you're getting blown up in terrorist attacks, and you're really getting in tune with ordinary life for the oppressed peoples of the third world.
Sometimes one doesn't know whether to laugh or cry, but yes, now getting raped is some kind of expression of allegiance with the poor, oppressed, and the downtrodden, I guess. Let me quote this out of the Breitbart story on this very interesting development. Quote, an active member of the Norwegian Socialist Left Party who described himself as an ardent, quote-unquote, feminist and anti-racist, Karsten explained the difficulty he experienced accepting that he had been anally raped by a male migrant. He said he didn't blame the man for the attack and regretted the fact that he had been sent back to Somalia. Okay, just before we move on, your observation of this, just in terms of him being he's a feminist and anti-racist, and he's regretting that his rapist is being punished. At the risk of being repetitive, but let's amplify these themes. What's going on here?
Well, like most of the female feminists who welcomed the refugees into Europe, he puts the anti-racist part ahead of the feminist part, so he's okay with the rape after all. And because of course, if you're going to be having problems with rape, then you're probably some sort of Islamophobe or some sort of racist. So you've got to put that ahead. The feminism has to take a backseat to the anti-racism.
Right. Again, from the Breitbart story, Mr. Hauken found himself unable to blame his attacker, saying, quote, "He is not responsible for his actions." End of quote. The Muslim who raped him was merely, quote, "a product of an unjust world, a product of an upbringing marked by war and deprivation." This is quoting the victim. Your thoughts on how he's attributing a victimhood to his perpetrator?
You know, this is actually incredibly racist because the essential idea is that the perpetrators have no agency, that they really have no choice but to rape, to kill, and to terrorize because they're just that oppressed and they're just that helpless. And this is an ongoing leftist pathology. It's an ongoing argument that they make, that these people have no agency, that criminals from a certain race or certain background are just driven to it. They have no choice. They're oppressed. And when you say that, you're saying these people have no moral authority. They have no moral choice. They have no ability to choose right or wrong or good and evil. That's just that. They have no choice whatsoever. We have choice. We have privilege. They have no choice whatsoever.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Exactly. There's always this racism on the left because they take away the free will and the agency of the people that they're promoting and defending, as you say. So now this story takes a little bit of a weirder, darker turn now. The victims was arguing, I'm sorry about this, it wasn't about the sex. The attack, the victim was saying, it wasn't sexually motivated. It was all about exerting power. And so this is the way the victim is excusing his rapist. I don't know. I'm a little bit baffled here. We do know that there is an intellectually leftist argument out there somewhere that rape is not about sex, but about power and violence. And yes, that's a whole argument in and of itself. We're not necessarily saying that some components of that are not true. But in this case, when a victim is actually making this intellectual argument on behalf of his rapist, what do you make of this?
The left reduces everything to power, and once everything is reduced to power, then there's no real good or evil. They're just people who have power and people who don't have power. So the left will argue, for example, that black people can't be racist because they don't have power. So this Somali rapist did not have power, therefore he could not have raped him. That's the logic.
Oh boy, truth is stranger than fiction when it comes to the left and leftists. Last bit from the Breitbart article, and then I want to analyze a few components of this in terms of the left in general. The Breitbart story says that the attack had not in any way dulled his left-wing politics. This is referring to the victim. Mr. Haugen said, quote, "I stand rock solid in my opinion that people like him need our help. I want us to continue to help refugees with such a background. For I am a human being first and not a Norwegian. No, I'm part of the world, and the world is unfortunately unfair. So I got raped. It's unfair. Let's not judge this Muslim refugee for raping me." Analysis, please, Daniel.
Well, who's to say that rape is wrong? If you play the moral equivalence game, nothing is right, nothing is wrong. It's all about who's more oppressed, and the Somali rapist is more oppressed, therefore we should have him in the country. And if he did carry out this act, well, then he was driven to it by oppression. If you reduce everything to power, then there's no good or evil, there's no right or wrong, there's just who has the power and who doesn't have the power. So you give the rapist more power, and then surely he will not rape again.
Right. So, Daniel, thank you so much. Now, you and I, in our own fields of study, what we've dedicated our lives to in terms of researching, I think, we're both, we've studied what the fellow travelers are, what leftists are in terms of how they want to build their utopian paradise, how they travel to these utopian paradises, whether it was the fellow travelers and visited Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, North Vietnam, Cuba, etc. Many of them were devoured by the tyranny that they worshipped. They sacrificed others on the altar of their utopian ideals, but ultimately they also sacrificed themselves. And so this story is very much this continuing narrative of how the leftist utopian wish ultimately is a death wish. Could you comment on that?
Utopia is death. The revolution devours its own children. It always has to devour its own children, because if you search for perfection, you're always searching for destruction. It's not a possible state of being. To create this kind of perfect state, you need totalitarianism, and you need to completely continue destroying humans over and over again in an endless cycle until there's absolutely nothing left. This is the history of the left. It's the history of Islam also, to a degree. You can't produce utopia. All you can really do is make people extremely miserable. But to deny that, you have to continue lying about it. You have to find scapegoats. You have to kill people. Then you have to do it all over again.
And then in some ways, you also need to be raped or killed. So let's just talk about what's going on here now. We know many cases from the past of fellow travelers that were devoured by the tyranny that they worshipped, but they also covered up, whether it was Durante or, all these fellow travelers who hid, the monstrosity of the tyrannies that they worshipped. So, for instance, we know that a lot of the women right now, this is very well documented now, a lot of the leftist women who are volunteering at these Muslim migrant camps, I mean, the evidence is now out there. Many of them are getting sexually harassed. Some are getting gang raped, and they themselves don't want this to come out, and the press is covering it up. And this is very much part of this story, right?
Yeah, this has been routine. There are women who refuse to come forward after the Cologne attacks. The women who go to do all this kind of anti-Israel activity in Palestinian areas, again, the same thing has gone on. This has been going on for a while. Peace Corps has had quite a few sexual assaults that they've covered up. But again, this is all for the greater cause, and the left does this again and again. It disposes of people, it sacrifices people, it uses them up, and they're told to keep on lying, keep the cult going. Don't tell the truth about the phony Messiah.
And ultimately, the blood that you're willing to shed in terms of others, it also becomes your own in the utopian enterprise. We know many stories, even in dangerous neighborhoods where some people want to prove their faith in humanity and don't lock their doors, and then they get killed, etc., etc. We know radical feminists that go to Gaza to support the anti-Israeli cause with the jihadists in Palestine, and they get raped by the jihadists there, by the Palestinians there, and they don't say anything and cover it up. So there's this kind of, they're sacrificing themselves on the altar of their ideals.
The left is in denial of human nature. It's an ideology built on denying human nature. So this kind of thing is inevitable if you deny basic facts about human nature, if you deny good and evil. If you create this fantasy world, you're going to pay the price eventually.
So, Daniel, in terms of this case, let's wrap it up. In terms of Karsten Nordal-Hauken, who was raped by a Muslim Somalian migrant and now is in despair that Muslim refugee has been deported, let us conclude. Avoiding rape is white privilege. Give us the conclusion.
The West is committing suicide. The entire idea of letting in refugees is suicide. And this guy is the perfect role model for the entire insane movement, which after all the sexual assaults in Cologne, which after all the terrorism, which after September 11th, still wants to bring large numbers of Muslims into the United States, into Canada, into Australia, into Europe. It's effectively doing the same exact thing. So this guy is the perfect role model for it. He's been raped. He's learned absolutely nothing from it, except that he should feel more guilty and that he should never blame the actual Muslim who did it. And that's what the West has learned from the from 9/11 and from every Muslim terrorist attack and act of violence since then.
You know, Robert Spencer, on a recent panel, we were at the David Horowitz's West Coast retreat. He said if you had, 30 little chocolate candies, but 10 of them are poisonous, would you still eat all of them? And, he was using an analogy there in terms of, yes, we know that not all refugees are bad, and we know there's many good people everywhere, including among people who are known or labeled as quote-unquote Muslims. But if there is a certain percentage and core of that population that might be infiltrated by, or simply, the members of that population are devout and are inspired by certain Islamic texts, it's a problem.
It's a problem, but again, the left is in the know about human nature, and it refuses to connect Islamic terrorism to anything else, Islam to anything else, to anything negative, to anything bad, to anything violent. That's racist, and they're, of course, anti-racist. So they are willing to eat all the M&Ms and commit suicide, and while they're dying, while still denying that the M&Ms have had anything to do with it. Instead, they'll blame colonialism and capitalism and just about anything else for their deaths.
Thank you, Daniel Greenfield. A pleasure and a privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, and we'll see you soon. And our audience, please remember, this is a fan-generated program. If you like this program and appreciate what we talk about, please support us at jamieglazov.com and make sure everybody you know is subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. We'll see you very soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.
This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.